Chapter 8. Our first job transfer. Leaving Dayton, heading for Georgia. We looked forward to the transfer. We didn't like Dayton all that much, but that was probably due to living conditions at the time. Had we lived in a nice home in a nice neighborhood, I am sure that things would have been much different. We spent the next few months in anticipation of moving and preparing for the day that we would pull away from Dayton. We had bought a good 1939 Plymouth from Ronnie's father, and that would be our transportation to Georgia. Now we needed something more to haul our most important items in, so we found a nice Bradley utility trailer at Sears and Roebuck. It cost $208 and weighed 550 pounds, had high sideboards and a good canvas cover. Just what we needed. Our credit was good, so we bought it. The day finally arrived, and we loaded all our belongings onto the trailer and headed out. We had already said our goodbyes to our friends and neighbors. Raymond and Sylvia Finney had become our friends from the earliest days in Dayton. They had 2 little daughters, Joyce and Louise, who were Deanie's little playmates. The Finneys were from Kentucky, and we have long since lost track of them. Everett Rose was the owner of the nearest tavern. He hated to see one of his best customers leave town. Ronnie was one of his best. We have forgotten the names of so many that we knew in those days, 41 years ago. Hallie and Pauline Miller, our old friends, were just getting started in their careers at Sunshine Biscuit Company. They hated to see us leave the area. First stop, West Virginia. You might think we headed south out of Dayton, but no, we headed east to West Virginia where Ronnie's parents lived. We had left many of our things there when we moved to Dayton, and we had things on our trailer that had a low priority for our trip to Georgia, so we would drop off a few things that could come later, when Ronnie's father would bring a truckload down to Georgia, and we would pick up our refrigerator and other needed items for immediate use upon our arrival in Georgia. We spent the night in West Virginia before heading south the next day. It was early August and very hot. The further south we traveled, the hotter it got. We had to stop a time or two while trying to cross the mountains in North Carolina, just to let our little 1939 Plymouth cool down. I remember one time in North Carolina, we were about 3/4 of the way up the mountain when we just had to pull over and let it cool down. Ronnie finally found some water for the radiator, and we were off and running again. Traveling was not easy in those days, especially when one was pulling a load. We had no superhighways, and the roads over the mountains were long and winding. The going was slow, and if one got behind a large truck, he could go for miles at a snail's pace. It was just impossible to go from Sylvester, West Virginia, to Macon, Georgia, in one day pulling such a load as we had. So we stayed overnight somewhere in northern Georgia. There was no charge for the sleeping quarters since the automobile belonged to us anyway. 2 grown-ups and 2 children can just about fill up a 1939 Plymouth when they all try to stretch out at the same time. We must have been having a heat wave at that time. I will never forget how hot it seemed and how the gnats and mosquitoes welcomed us to the south. They seemed to enjoy the new blood from the north. Arrival in Macon, Georgia. Well, we finally arrived in Macon in the early afternoon, and not knowing where we would stay that night, we decided to drive on out to Robins Air Force Base, another 10 to 12 miles to the south. We just wanted to get our bearings, so we ayuked the piece over from the outside and then doubled back to Macon. Just outside the city limits at 7 Bridges, we discovered some tourist cabins. These were popular in those days. Now they have motels. They had a vacant 2-room cabin available, which was just right for us at the time. We could stay as long as was needed until we could find a permanent residence. We remained there 2 weeks before finding a duplex apartment with Fred and Katie Parmalee and their 2 boys, Doug and Mike, living on the other end. Ronnie reported to his new office at Robins Air Force Base soon after we arrived and got settled in at his work. Several other families made the move from Wright-Patterson to Robins Air Force Base, so we were not entirely alone. Fred Parmalee and Ronnie worked together, so it seemed natural that when Fred found a vacant duplex on Virginia Drive in Macon, he asked us to rent the other end. Rented an apartment, bought house. Well, we did rent the apartment, and it cost us each $65 per month for our apartments. That would be the equivalent of about $325 of today's dollars. We soon found that a new housing project was underway, not far from us, but a little closer to Ronnie's work. The area was called Jefferson Hills. It would cost us $6,800 for a 2-bedroom house. I had done some washing and cooking for some of the single men back in Dayton, Ohio, and along with a little savings from Ronnie's paycheck, we had enough to make the down payment of about $250. The balance went on a VA loan at 4% interest. We picked out the lot and type of house we wanted, and they had us ready to move in by about March 1953. I was so proud to finally have a little house of our own. I kept it so clean, and we built up the lawn with Charleston grass and planted roses, azaleas, Japanese holly, magnolia, and pin oak, and many other shrubs and flowers. It was beautiful. We later doubled the size of the house and made it a split level with a good-sized basement. Our house became the nicest house in the entire project, and our address for the next 17 years would be 3880 Andrews Drive, Macon, Georgia, 31206. But there would be periods of time that someone else would occupy the house while we would fill assignments overseas. We were to fill many such assignments throughout Ronnie's career with the federal government. Children start to school. It was while we still lived on Virginia Avenue that little Ron Jr. first started to school. This was a great day in his life, and mine too. I dressed him up as cute as I knew how and accompanied him to Winship School located on Beach Street and Pio Nono Avenue, which was within walking distance from our apartment. That was my first experience with such things. But somehow I got him registered and did all the things a parent is supposed to do on those first days of school. Ronnie Jr. attended Winship School until March 1953, when we moved into our new home in Jefferson Hills. Then he transferred to Cynthia Weir School on Rocky Creek Road and Houston Avenue. Little Deanie also started there the following September 1953. Mrs. Sherling was their school principal. I remember that she was so kind. She even came to the house a few days after Christmas of that year, just to keep a promise to Ron Jr. that she would stop by to see his new bicycle. She certainly loved the children. I used to dress the children up so cute to send them to school. Little Ron Jr. was so cute on his first day of school. I just thought he was the handsomest little boy in school. Deanie was so cute that she didn't need much to make her the prettiest little girl in school. The neighbors. We had such good neighbors in Macon. Francis J. and Margie Rooney lived on our right. The Honeyketts lived on our left. Ernest and Vivian Cooper lived across the street from us, and when they moved, there came the Williams family, who were equally as neighborly. The Bells lived on their right, and the Cochrans on their left. These were all families from various religious backgrounds, but we all seemed to live in harmony. We felt their love for us and we loved them. Margie Rooney's mother, Mrs. Gordy, was a very dear friend. I was so sad when I heard of her death, and also Mr. Cochrane's death while we were in Israel about 1978. Surely the Lord will remember their goodness. We had so many good friends in our neighborhood, and we shall always have the fondest of memories of them. Most of them were either Baptists or Methodists, and were good church-going people for the most part. We did have one or two in the neighborhood who loved to drink. Richard Russell loved to take Ronnie to the local tavern for a beer or two, as often as possible. Drinkers like to have company when they drink. The Bells had one son who loved to drink, and there was one other one more on our street who liked to drink, but all in all we had a pretty good neighborhood. Even those who drank were in reality real nice people. Another promotion for Ronnie. Ronnie had received another promotion by the time we moved to Andrews Drive, so we had begun to fare a little better. Our furnishings for the house improved, and our automobiles had begun to look a little better. Ronnie remained a grade GS7 for only about 12 or 13 months, and then the government advanced him to grade GS-9. They made him a unit chief, with about 30 people under him, and that put him in position to receive the grade of GS-11 within another year. Turning to God. It felt good to have a little more money. The Lord was blessing us. It was about this time that we began thinking more about the Lord. Our children were growing fast and we wanted to raise them properly. In the Soviet Union, they had taught us that there was no such thing as God. They taught this in our schools, and our parents did not dare oppose them. I had seen my dear old grandmother on her knees praying silently by herself, and then my mother did the same thing. So those things stuck with me, and now that I was in a free land where religion was all around me, I wanted to know more than ever if God really did exist. We had gone to the Methodist church a few times with Fred and Katie Parmalee while we lived on Virginia Avenue. The Cherokee Heights Methodist Church was our very first effort in church going. Cherokee Heights sits on the corner of Napier Street and Pio Nono Avenue. Ronnie Jr. was about 7 by that time, and he marched right in and asked if he could join the church. He didn't even think to ask us, but of course we didn't mind. He would watch church programs on TV at home, and when the preacher would ask who loves the Lord, little Ron Jr. would raise his hand. Now that we were living on Andrews Drive, we had to drive a little further to get to Cherokee Heights Methodist Church. We mostly just went to Sunday school because Ronnie couldn't stand too much of what he called hellfire and brimstone preaching. He still liked his beer, so we had to hurry home quickly before he died of thirst each Sunday. Once in a while, I would attend church with our neighbors, Margie and Francis J. Rooney. They were Baptists. Finally, the Methodists put up a large church tent near us in the neighborhood, and I began going there because Ronnie preferred the Methodist church. Their preaching was milder than the Baptists, and Ronnie's family background was Methodist. I knew that if the kids and I attended there, it might be easier to get Ronnie to attend church with us. Ronnie finally joins Church with Us. It wasn't until about 1957 that Ronnie finally joined with us, and we all became members of the Glenwood Hills Methodist Church. In the meantime, the children had gone to Cynthia Weir, Agnes Barden, and Jessie Rice schools. The community was growing rapidly, and new schools were being built to accommodate the rapid growth. Ronnie was doing well at work and had become a supervisor after taking a 16-week Dale Carnegie course. He was always doing something to improve himself. Our miracle. Prior to our joining the church at Glenwood Hills Methodist, a big miracle occurred in our lives. It was in September 1956. Ronnie Jr. was about to become 10 years old in a few days, and his father, Ronnie Sr., had been thinking about it very seriously. He had been drinking rather heavily within recent months, and he was concerned about the effect his drinking would have on the children. On this particular Sunday morning, 9th September 1956, on Ron Jr.'s 10th birthday, while the children and I were in church, Ronnie was at home, watching the preacher Oral Roberts on television during one of his healing services. Ronnie was impressed that if the Lord could heal those people, then maybe he would heal him if he asked. Ronnie related to me how he had poured out his heart to the Lord at that time, and how something resembling an electrical shock and a cold chill hit him at the top of his head and swept through his body and out at the bottoms of his feet, leaving him completely free of any desire for alcohol. Ronnie did not reveal this to me for several days, but I had observed that he had come straight home from work every evening that week. That wasn't normal, but I was afraid to say anything, for fear that I would just remind him that he needed one of the 2 bottles of beer that was still in the refrigerator. I wept freely. Finally, I couldn't stand it any longer. I just had to find out what was happening. I was overcome with emotion, and I wept freely as I asked him what in the world had happened to him. It was then that he related to me how he had been healed instantly. I wasn't really acquainted with such spiritually related things at that time, but I knew it had to be something wonderful. It was about this time that we began to look into religion with increased interest. Ronnie wondered about reincarnation, so he read a book dealing with that subject. Then we saw an advertisement on mental physics, so we decided to order the literature for that. We received the beginner's course from California and got right into it. Institute of Mental Physics. We did the deep breathing exercises and repeated all the words and phrases that were a part of the exercise program. Edwin J. Dingle, Ding LeMay, who was the founder of the First Church of Mystic Christianity, or the Institute of Mental Physics, was the master teacher, and his material made lots of sense until he tried to describe God. His teachings on that subject just didn't seem to ring true. I could not pray to an all-pervading spirit. I had pictured God as a personal being that looked like Jesus Christ. Ronnie and I didn't pray to Jesus Christ, but to his Father in heaven, as Jesus himself directs us to do in the Bible when he explained to his apostles how to pray. I have since learned that his name is Elohim, and that he is also our Heavenly Father. That was the way I had perceived that we should pray, prior to Mr. Dingle's theory on the subject of God. I was confused. Now I was confused. One thing in defense of Mr. Dingle, though. He was truly ahead of his time in understanding how the mind operates and how to do a reprogramming function on the mind. I had just learned to accept Jesus Christ as the Savior of the world, and I thought I had finally learned to whom I should pray. And now Edwin Dingle really had me confused. He had said that Christ was only a good teacher, and his concept of God made praying to him awfully difficult for me. I asked Ronnie if he was as confused as I was, and he said that he was. Well, we continued to pray anyway, and I guess our Heavenly Father was hearing our prayers. My husband had also been praying for enlightenment and knowledge, but hadn't told me at the time. One does not always know that prayers are being answered at the time of the actual event. And usually it is much later that our vision clears sufficiently for us to know what has happened. As I look back, I can see a series of events that took place in our lives that eventually led us to the Lord's own true church. First, Ronnie had to stop drinking, while I was at the same time being introduced into Christianity through visits to Baptist and Methodist churches. Then our interest in reincarnation, mental physics, and finally, in 1957, our joining the Methodist Church. We continued to study and actively participate in Methodist activities, and we both sang in the choir. I worked with the youth program while Ronnie was elected, and served as president of the Methodist Men's Club and taught a Sunday school class. We both served diligently and kept the Lord's commandments, as well as we knew how to keep them. We continued to pray for light and knowledge while studying with the Methodists, who often prayed directly to Jesus Christ, while Edwin Dingle referred to him as only a good man and a wonderful teacher, and that God himself was an all-pervading spirit that could not be seen by man. All this was so confusing to me, but I was satisfied that there was a God somewhere out there who could hear and answer prayers. Surely the Lord must have heard our prayers. Surely the Lord must have heard our prayers. It was in November 1958 that two missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints stopped at our house at 3880 Andrews Drive, Macon, Georgia, 31206. I was impressed with their dress and clean-cut look. I had never heard of Joseph Smith or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints before, but they seemed so serious and believable that I listened intently as they explained how Joseph Smith was a prophet of God and how Christ and Elohim, God the Father, had visited with him in a grove of trees in Upper New York near Palmyra. It was a fascinating story, and I wanted Ronnie to hear about it too, so they made an appointment to come back on Saturday when he would be home. Who was this Joseph Smith? I couldn't remember the name of She Church. It was too much for me. But I could remember Joseph Smith. So I told Ronnie that two young ministers had stopped by the house and had mentioned Joseph Smith. Ronnie didn't know very much about Joseph Smith, but he had heard some little something about him. So he looked up the name in our encyclopedia. It was amazing how little was written about him and the church in 1958. Today, in 1993, there is much written about him and the church in present-day encyclopedias. We stayed home that Saturday in order to keep our appointment with the Mormon missionaries. They arrived at the appointed time, and we welcomed them with politeness. They didn't lose much time in getting right into the story of the restoration of the gospel, and we felt the strength of their testimonies. Elders Lush and Shelley were the two missionaries for that day. Elder Lush never came back, but his strong testimony is still remembered to this day. Elder Shelley soon transferred to Warner Robins, and we only saw him on special occasions afterward. But Elder Stanley Hovey picked up the visits and continued to return often with many different companions over the next several months. He contributed most to our conversion, but he also had to depart for home after a while. So he didn't get to complete the job. But two able missionaries, Elders Theodore Bone and Neil Lish, continued to visit until Ronnie was baptized. During the time the missionaries were visiting us, we continued going to the Methodist Church as we had many dear friends there, and it was not easy to pull away. We really drug our feet and made lots of excuses for our procrastination. But as always, truth won out, and Ronnie was baptized on 21st August 1959 by Elder Bone and confirmed by Elder Lish, although the children and I were not baptized until June of 1960. Reassignment for Ronnie changing churches. Without further explanation, one would wonder why we were not all baptized at the same time. But there is much more to the story. Ronnie was ready to be baptized, and it had to be done right away, as he was being reassigned and was leaving for Germany the next Monday morning, and would not be back for 2 years. Ronnie had been praying for a way out that would not offend our Methodist friends, and finally the answer came in the form of a job transfer that would take us to Germany for 2 years. This meant that Ronnie could go ahead with his baptism, but there were still social problems existing for me and the children, and we would wait until we were completely out of sight of our Methodist friends, on whom we had to rely for favors, until we were ready to join Ronnie in Germany. Ronnie was baptized at almost midnight on Friday night, August 21st, 1959. It was late due to a speaking engagement that I had at a Methodist church about 30 miles away. Ronnie had made up his mind. We arrived back in Macon at the LDS Chapel on Beach and Patterson Street about 11 p.m., and a small band of true blue Latter-day Saints were waiting for us. They had waited patiently, not knowing exactly when or if we would arrive. It wouldn't be the first time someone was scheduled for baptism and got cold feet and didn't go through with it. But Ronnie had made up his mind, and there was no turning back for him. I still remember a few of the saints present that night of 21st August 1959. Lucille Bennett and her daughter Sylvia, now Sylvia Holman, who played the piano for the occasion, later became our very dear friends. Of course, the elders, missionaries, were there. Elder Cahoon gave a talk on baptism, and then Ronnie was baptized by Elder Bone, then confirmed by Elder Lish. The next day was Saturday, and we spent the day preparing Ronnie for departure on Monday. We had to spend Sunday with our Methodist friends in the Methodist church, since it would be Ronnie's last day in the States for the next 2 years. I continued attending the Methodist church until the children and I were ready to join Ronnie in Germany in December 1959. So we didn't see those who were at the baptism for the next 2 years. That's why I only remembered a few of them. Big promotion for Ronnie. We were pleased that Ronnie had received a promotion to GS-12 before leaving for Germany. This gave us a $1,400 annual increase, and that was lots of money back in 1959. The time from August to December seemed like forever, and the children and I were so happy when word came from Ronnie to ship the furniture and other household goods over to Germany and come on over as soon as possible. The people at Robins Air Force Base took care of the packing and shipping our household goods, and they handled all the preparations for our flight to Germany. I was able to rent the house before we departed. So when all was in order, we said our goodbyes to neighbors and Methodist church friends.